So I wanted to share with you a continuing internal experience brought on by an invitation from the Eastern Washington University Department of Community Engagement to come and speak on kindness, to sort of kick off their yearly week of kindness. They have all sorts of wonderful programs to instill this idea in the faculty and the student community there. And so it was forwarded to me, and I said I'd be more than happy to do it. So the young student who was the coordinator of this said, well, there's a few things we'd really love for you to share. First, we'd love for you to share, what is the origin of this movement of kindness, this day of kindness, random acts of kindness week of kindness, day of world international. There's all these movements going on in the world about practicing kindness in our lives. She says, what's the origin of some of these stories? And what kind of help or support or some ideas can you help us to have to be able to integrate and grow kindness in our daily lives? And also, lastly, is how do we, in relationship to what's happened in Florida, because this was about just around that time, the 14th, when we got the invitation, it's close to that. She said, how does kindness play a part? How do we respond to this, the shootings in Florida? And she had sent a link that was in regards to Ann Curry, one of the news anchors on TV. After the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012, she put a request out into the world. It was hashtag 26acts to invite people to practice random acts of kindness in response to this tragedy. And within a week and a half, tens of thousands of people responded to her through their Twitter accounts, sharing their experience of doing these random acts of kindness and how profoundly affected not only them, but the people that they engaged with. She says, how can we work that into what's happening in Florida right now? So I said, well, that's a handful to do, but I'll give it my best shot. So I did some research, and interesting enough, there's not a lot about these movements, like what facilitated them, what precipitates these days of kindness. One was started in Denver in 1997. There's the Random Acts of Kindness Foundation out of New Zealand that has a beautiful website that has people sharing these instances in their lives where they practice kindness. They've got materials for educators where they can teach children, healthy emotional skills regarding kindness projects and being gentle in the world, but not a lot of specific stuff. So then I got into this, this quote, this random acts of kindness quote. It doesn't sound quite like Hallmark. It's not really new agey, but I've been tracking this quote for years. And I said, where did this come from? Who coined this phrase? And there's foundations and movements around this concept. And so where did it come from? And this is where things got really interesting and really important for me in a profound way. So it was coined by a woman writer. Her name was Ann Herbert in 1982, 36 years ago. She was 30 years old, and she was the assistant editor of a grassroots progressive quarterly called Coevolution Quarterly, which was sort of the spin-off of, I'm going to date myself, Whole Earth Catalog, which was this incredible grassroots movement back in the 60s and 70s, sort of anti-government, self-sustainability, taking care of the earth, concerns about the corporations taking over a lot of the natural resources of our country. And the motto of this quarterly is, we were dedicated to mystification, to self-teaching, and to encouraging people to think for themselves. That was kind of the vision statement of this quarterly, which at 30 years of age, she was the assistant editor, founded by Stuart Brand, who was another whole incredible person. So, and this is how it happened. This is one of her friends, Paloma Ravel. She explained it in this way. Ann Herbert and I were responding to our despair at accelerating systemic violence. Racial violence and police brutality, and the international drumbeat to war in the Persian Gulf that was engulfing the nighttime news. Totally different than you would think. We wanted to stop the wars, to create a spell that would shatter the trance. And the trance was, they took a phrase that was in the news, at that time it was pre-internet, so it was, David Brinkley, Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, and the rest of the gang. There was a phrase that was being used a lot, random violence and senseless acts of cruelty. That was how the news was reporting what was going on in the U.S., what was going on. It was the Iranian hostage crisis, just a lot of racially motivated violence in our country. So they took the phrase random violence and senseless acts of cruelty and created a reversal, which is to use the feminist philosopher Mary Daly's strategy, where you take a violent phrase and you turn it on its head. And you do that by inserting precious, virtuous qualities instead. So they replaced violence for kindness and cruelty with beauty. And Paloma says it wasn't too tough to find kindness replacing violence, not the wimpy kind of kindness, but the tough Dalai Lama, never give up kind of kindness. And then the Whole Earth Review, which was its sort of brother publication at the time, 1974 to 1984, they had this quote: "Random acts of kindness are always encouraged, but never forget that this form of kindness was originally intended to be a form of anarchist rebellion." These were desperate people who saw where the U.S. was going and were just said, enough is enough, sounding hauntingly familiar. In a world that is being formed by strangulating economic systems, environmental killing corporations, and laws fueling self-centeredness, be kind can be revolutionary. Be kind can smash the whole damn system to the ground. Being kind is what the world many times doesn't want us to be. But Ann Herbert and the Whole Earth world reminds us it's actually who we really are. So this young woman writer was responding to her country's participation in war and racial violence, environmental degradation, whatever the trance was, because it was becoming a normalized thought that America had to deal with Iran, they had to get involved in war. This is how we kept people, reined in by, bullying them. And she scribbled this on a placemat in some restaurant in Sausalito, California. And maybe because she had enough fame, enough influence, that random practice, random kindness and senseless acts of beauty went out into the world and was reproduced, you can honestly say, millions and millions of times over, on bumper stickers, coffee mugs, T-shirts, window decals, stationary cards. For the last 36 years, random practice, random kindness, and senseless acts of beauty has been permeating the human consciousness on a conscious and unconscious level. And here we are in this little university, in a farming community in Cheney, Washington, and we have a group of students who want to know about this random kindness thing. It's still floating around. It's still engaged. It's still changing people's lives. And they were astounded by the fact that this quote was older than they were. They thought it was just something that kind of came in on their generation. So the talk was going to be it was in the library, and they were hoping for a big attendance. Well, it turned out to be a very, very small circle of just a few people. So it ended up becoming more of a sharing than a talk. So I started out with the small circle, defining the qualities of kindness, which are warmth, generosity, and consideration, usually directed toward ourselves because we tend to be pretty harsh and unkind with our own inner dialogue. This perfectionism, unrealistic expectations, denigrating self-hatred. So that's a good place to start kindness. Then we work out to our loved ones, our friends, eventually strangers, and maybe when we get really good at it, the people that we have difficulty with. But it's an internal attitude that comes from the inside out into the world. And that by doing so, we become beneficiaries, that we show this kindness and it comes back around, we feel better, and that it really does serve everybody. Now, I said what's going to happen, though, especially this random acts of kindness thing, because I was getting really into this idea, and it was becoming a profound, like a meditation for me. I said it takes some effort. Because to have random acts of kindness in our lives, we have to be paying attention. We have to have trained our mind in this kind of kind, warm, considerate heart so that we're out in the world looking up from our iPhones more than 15 seconds is to be able to engage face-to-face, hand-to-hand, to protect, to encourage, to support, to help anybody who's in need. And that random kindness becomes a spontaneous, authentic, uncontrived kind of practice if we do it enough, but it requires a lot of training. So until then, we can be focused about who we're going to be kind to, and we can build up to that. So then, this question, so it kind of, since it was a sharing, I didn't want to hog the whole circle, so I just let it sit for a little bit. And then one of the young women said, okay, so how does kindness help when we have these tragedies like in Florida? And when we have people in power in our country that are doing so much harm? Or when somebody's harming somebody that we care about, or somebody's harming me? How does kindness work in those situations? So I kind of let this question like kind of hang in the middle of the circle. It just hung there, suspended in a really kind of loose, gentle sort of way. And I said, just let it sit, Semke. Something will happen here. And then this young woman, this is what I'm just blown away this whole week about, is she told this story. She said, I got my car broken into recently and had all my stuff stolen. She said, at first I was really, really upset. And she said, then I thought to myself, do you really think that this person woke up that morning and said, I'm going to steal somebody's stuff? She said, I had to answer and say, I don't think they got up in the morning and opened their eyes and said, I'm going to steal somebody's stuff. I'm listening to her and watching her mind expand as she's talking. She said, well, maybe they stole my stuff because they had to steal it so they could get money for it because they needed food to eat. Maybe they needed to steal my stuff to get money because they needed to keep a roof over their heads or their family's heads. Maybe there's somebody in their life that's desperate and they needed money really, really fast. Or maybe they needed the pillow because you had a pillow in her car that was also stolen. Maybe they needed a good night's sleep. And then she says, and then what I did is I mentally, freely gave everything to them. And I said to them in my mind, may everything that I've given you be able to take care of whatever you need. And I was like, thought transformation, thought training, at its most profound. And she was just like this. And she said, and my friends kind of thought I was being misoptimistic. And I was like, people were just sitting in the circle, just like silence. And I just bowed to her and I said, thank you for sharing one of the most profound examples of kindness that I have ever heard in recent time. And what I said to her is that, okay, and then she said, how come? She was kind of puzzled by my response. And I said, well, first things, the kindness you showed to yourself. You didn't rebuke yourself. You didn't blame yourself. You didn't nag on yourself. You didn't give yourself a hard time for getting your stuff stolen. Secondly, you were totally kind to giving everything away. Totally freeing that person of any kind of, result that might come from stealing from somebody. And the other thing that you've done is that what His Holiness says in these difficult situations, what you need to do is you need perspective. He says you look at things above, below, left, right, close, far away, because you want to really see the most complete holistic view of a situation through a bigger lens. And that we can respond more wisely and constructively, which is what she did. And the beauty of this wider perspective is that it denies nothing about the reality of the situation, but puts it in proper place in reality. So you could see her whole response to what happened to her. She opened up her entire world and changed her whole relationship to what happened to her. And that this is not magical thinking. That both the spiritual leaders of our world as well as psychological researchers are showing that the way we see the world is the way we experience the world. And changing the way we see the world changes the way we feel and act, which changes the world itself. And so then I said in response to what's going on in Florida, I said at the same time, reality is that probably, I don't know if you have yet because it was just recent, I said, but you're probably going to have to file a police report so that the community is aware of what's happened. On a practical level, kindness doesn't mean you just sort of forget about life, the practical aspects of life. You're going to have to purchase things that you've gotten stolen. You're going to have to rethink driving around with your stuff in your car in the back seat. That can be a temptation for somebody who's right on the edge. So, it's not like being kind and having this beautiful mind of giving your things away to this person so they could really use it for what they need it for. It doesn't mean that you don't do the practical things to take care of yourself and do corrective measures. So I said, this is what's happening in Florida. You look at the young people who are standing up, and I said, I can honestly say, as impassioned as they are, as emotional as they are, I said, I don't hear any hatred in their voices. I don't hear any vitriol. I don't hear any fear. I don't hear any revenge. I hear courage. I hear wisdom. I hear determination. I hear truth. And the kindness that's coming out is that they not only care about each other, they care about their entire generation. They're looking at this big picture. It's not just short-term fix here. They're looking at the entire future of their generation, and they're saying enough is enough. So they're doing not only their own generation an incredible kindness, they're doing all of us an incredible kindness. And they're calling their politicians on the carpet for contributions from NRA, but they're doing that because they care, because their kindness is just pouring out of them in this very impassioned way. So that's how we bring the kindness to these situations. We don't roll over. Random kindness isn't a people pleaser. It doesn't care about its reputation. It doesn't discriminate about who I'm going to help and who I'm not going to help. And they're a perfect example of how kindness manifests in our lives. And so to take this young person's experience to heart, this is a profound experience of how you deal with difficult situations with kindness. And then you look at these young people, your peers, and what they're doing is a profound act of kindness for the world. And to really see that, and that this little random acts of kindness quote keeps floating around, just circumambulating the globe, bringing this kind of response in the minds and hearts of people everywhere. And so I got really, totally changed my relationship to this quote and seeing it as a profound practice and seeing wonderful examples of how that is being embodied by this generation and feeling very inspired, very hopeful, and very encouraged as a result. It was great.